The sky over Moscow turned into hell. The roar of engines echoed for hours in the capital's skies, combined with explosions that shattered the silence of the night. Beneath the sky ablaze with flames, there was panic, fear, and uncontrolled flight. More than 40 unmanned aerial vehicles sent by Ukraine performed a dance of death over the Kremlin's apple of the eye. Moscow's airports were hastily closed, flights were halted, and hundreds of passengers waiting for takeoff were stranded in the terminal. As metro stations turned into panic shelters, screams mingled with sirens rose in the streets. Traffic collapsed. Thousands of Russian citizens couldn't return home, and thousands more couldn't leave their homes. There was nowhere left to run. The capital, declared untouchable by Putin, brought the reality of war to over 20 million people that night. This war was no longer a distant disaster watched on television. This time, it was right outside the window. Beyond that window was Ukraine's largest attack since March. The attack began in the evening. When the first UAV approached from the Kaluga direction, Moscow's air defense network went on alert after a brief delay. But this was no ordinary alert. At the same time, more than 40 unmanned aerial vehicles at different altitudes were detected coming from the west, north, and southeast. The Kremlin immediately activated the Emergency Air Security Protocol, known as the Cover Plan. This protocol is like a sudden paralysis. All takeoffs are cancelled, landings are halted. All aircraft in the air are diverted to other airports. The airspace is completely cleared. While this may seem like a logical precaution on paper, in reality, for Moscow, one of Europe's largest metropolises, this decision turned into a disaster etched into the sky. Moscow's three giant airports, Sheremetyevo, Domodedovo, and Vnukovo, were plunged into warlike chaos within minutes. More than 200 flights were cancelled in just 40 minutes. The word cancelled flashed continuously on the giant screens inside the terminal. These screens were now like news bulletins. The list of planes unable to take off grew longer and longer, while those inside witnessed their connection to the outside world being severed. The corridors filled up. People sat on the floor. Children tried to sleep on top of suitcases, while the elderly gave up waiting in line and leaned against the wall. Men in suits on business trips were tired of calling their offices to say, "My flight has been cancelled," while mothers tried to distract their children by showing them something to watch. Vacationers were tired, students were anxious. But the real disaster of this chaos was unfolding for the planes that were in the air at that moment. An Aeroflot passenger plane about to land at Sheremetyevo had already entered its landing pattern. However, the tower gave the instruction, "Go around immediately. Alternative airport." Not only that, dozens of planes coming from Minsk, Istanbul, Almaty, and Berlin were suddenly forced to change their routes. Airports in cities such as St. Petersburg, Kazan, Nizhny Novgorod, and Yaroslavl, which were the first diversion points, quickly reached capacity. With no alternatives left, dozens of planes were forced into holding patterns around Moscow, meaning they had to circle for hours. As the hours passed, fuel levels dropped to critical levels, and then, one of the most terrifying scenes ever recorded unfolded. A passenger plane, running low on fuel and searching for a place to land, glided like a ghost, just a few meters above a residential area in one of Moscow's suburbs, passing over apartment buildings and houses. That moment was the most terrifying proof of how close the war had come, both for the hundreds of passengers inside the plane and for the thousands of people watching this giant metal bird from their windows. Despite these tragedies, the first statements from the Russian Ministry of Defense were triumphant. "The terrorist attack by the Kiev regime has been thwarted," they said. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin gave the first signal of the capital's night of horror on the evening of September 22nd at 7 p.m. That's because the first UAVs had entered Moscow's airspace at that moment. The statement that followed was even more shocking. The last 5 drones were destroyed after 11 p.m. on September 23rd. In other words, Russia's capital had tried to resist a continuous attack in the sky for exactly 16 hours. During this time, 41 unmanned aerial vehicles were shot down in the Moscow region alone. However, the events were not limited to the capital. The official summary released by the Russian Defense Ministry at the end of the night revealed that the attack was a comprehensive UAV operation. Many strategic regions, from Belgorod to Bryansk, from Kaluga to Kursk, and from Rostov, Ryazan, and Samara to Saratov were targeted by Ukrainian-made unmanned aerial vehicles that same night. And it wasn't just Russian territory. The skies over occupied Crimea were also part of this coordinated assault. It was announced that a total of 69 unmanned aerial vehicles were successfully destroyed. This was a page from the Kremlin's standard playbook. Deny the truth, blame the enemy, and convey the message that everything is under control. But in the 21st century, especially in a metropolis where everyone has a camera in their pocket, it was no longer possible to maintain this wall of propaganda. While official statements were being read on television, the Telegram channels used by Russians themselves were broadcasting a completely different reality, raw and unfiltered, to the whole world. Videos poured in from different parts of Moscow. Moments of explosions lighting up the night. Moments when an air defense missile missed its target and landed near an apartment complex, burning vehicles and people running in panic. This showed that the Kremlin had lost the battle. People now believe not what the state said, but the videos their neighbors had filmed, what they had seen with their own eyes. And what they saw was that the fairy tale of the invincible air defense shield they had been told was a complete lie. So, propaganda aside, what is the reality on the ground? Why is Moscow's famous shield, known as the world's most dense, sophisticated and layered air defense network, so helpless against these relatively cheap and slow drones? Is this failure merely a technical weakness, or is it a sign that Russian war doctrine has fundamentally failed? The answer to these questions lies in the vast chasm between the Kremlin's power on paper and the harsh reality on the ground. On paper, Moscow is the best protected city on the planet. Its defense is based on a multi-layered ring system, each layer designed to counter a different threat. The outermost ring features the S-400 Triumph and even the newest S-500 Prometheus long-range systems, the jewels in the crown of Russian military technology. The task of these systems is to detect and destroy strategic bombers, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles approaching from hundreds of kilometers away. They are the outermost, thickest walls of the castle. The middle layer consists of modernized versions of the S-300 and systems such as the Buk. This layer acts as a safety net against medium-range threats that manage to penetrate the first ring. And in the innermost ring, directly above the city, are the point defense systems. These are the last line of defense, designed to protect the regime's nerve centers, the Kremlin, the Defense Ministry building, and the generals' residences. The star of this layer is the Pantsir S-1 self-propelled gun and missile system, which in recent years has even been installed on the roofs of buildings in Moscow. The Pantsir's task is to destroy targets such as low-flying cruise missiles and helicopters at close range. This layer is also supported by other short-range elements such as Tor missile systems. Above all these kinetic defense layers is an invisible dome that covers everything: electronic warfare systems. Powerful jammers like Krasuka and Pole 21 should, in theory, render any UAV approaching the city blind and deaf by disrupting its GPS signal or jamming its control frequency, forcing it to crash. On paper, this is an impenetrable, perfect defense architecture. So why did this perfect architecture collapse on the night of September 23rd? There is no single reason behind the failure of Moscow's defense. This is a systemic fiasco, created by a combination of technological, tactical, and doctrinal weaknesses. First and foremost, Moscow's defense systems, costing millions, even billions of dollars, were designed for the wrong type of war. Systems like the S-400 and S-500 are optimized to hit a handful of very expensive, very fast, high-flying targets. They are like a sniper rifle designed to hunt a herd of elephants. However, the threat posed by Ukraine is not a herd of elephants. It is a swarm of bees coming from hundreds of directions, flying slowly, low, and with an extremely small radar signature. These small, composite material UAVs are extremely difficult for the massive S-400 radars to detect. And even if they do detect them, that's when the real problem begins. The cost of a single 48 N6 series interceptor missile fired from an S-400 battery ranges from $2 to $3 million. The cost of the kamikaze UAVs sent by Ukraine, on the other hand, ranges from $20,000 to $100,000, depending on the model. So, to shoot down a single UAV, Russia has to pay 20 to 100 times its cost. This is an unsustainable economic war. Russia is wasting its most valuable and limited air defense ammunition against Ukraine's cheap, mass-produced UAVs by lighting up the skies over Moscow every night with millions of dollars worth of missiles. With this strategy, Ukraine is not only creating panic in Moscow, but also economically bankrupting Russia's most modern air defense systems. Traditional air defense systems perform best in open terrain, where the horizon is clear. However, a massive metropolis like Moscow is a complete nightmare for radars. A low-flying UAV can use the radar shadows and ground clutter created by tall buildings, bridges, and other structures to conceal itself until it is detected by a ground-based Pantsir system. The city provides natural camouflage and hiding places for UAVs. This makes the defenders' job exponentially more difficult. Ukraine is not simply carrying out these attacks by sending drones to Moscow. This is an extremely sophisticated and well-planned operation. The UAVs attack not from a single direction, but from different directions around the city, at different times and at different altitudes, attempting to saturate the defense system, i.e., force it to deal with more targets than it can handle at the same time. There are likely UAVs within the swarm with different roles. Some carry electronic warfare equipment to jam Russian radars and communications. Others conduct reconnaissance to confirm targets. And finally, strike UAVs head toward the target. This is an intelligent war waged not against a single target, but against the defense network as a whole. And finally, even the most perfect air defense system does not offer a 100% guarantee. Even if a defense system successfully destroys 95% of incoming targets, this may appear to be a defensive victory. However, in an attack involving 40 UAVs, this means that at least 2 UAVs will still reach their target or their wreckage will fall somewhere. In a metropolis of 20 million, even a single UAV causing damage is enough to create the intended psychological effect, fear and panic. While a 95% failure rate is a victory for the attacker, a 5% breach is a complete fiasco for the defender. When all these reasons are considered together, it becomes clear why Moscow's famous shield was breached. This is not just a few drones slipping through. It is the declaration that Russia's air defense doctrine, built over decades at a cost of billions of dollars, has failed in the face of the cheap, smart, and asymmetric threats of the 21st century. The greatest and most lasting damage from this attack was not to buildings or infrastructure, but to the tacit social contract Putin had with his own people, especially Muscovites. This contract was simple. Don't get involved in politics, don't question my leadership, and I will provide you with stability, prosperity, and most importantly, security. Let war be the problem of people in poor regions and prisoners. You continue your comfortable lives in Moscow. On the night of September 23rd, this contract was unilaterally terminated. War was no longer the problem of others. War was at the heart of Moscow. The drone parts that fell near the Rubliovka highway, where the city's richest and most elite live, sent a message that even the most protected were no longer safe. The air defense systems operating around the gleaming skyscrapers known as Moscow City were proof that this attack was not actually targeting military objectives, but was a psychological operation aimed directly at the nerves of the Russian elite. Ukraine's strategy was brilliant. The goal was not to achieve a military victory by destroying a few buildings. The goal was to confront a metropolis of 20 million people, especially the middle and upper classes, the regime's biggest supporters, with the true cost of the war. The goal was to make them ask themselves, if Putin can't even protect our capital, why is this war continuing? This attack also had another very important military consequence. To protect Moscow, the Kremlin had to withdraw some of the most modern and effective air defense systems on the front line, such as the Pantsir S-1S, to the capital. These systems were even installed on the roofs of important buildings in the city. Every attack on Moscow left the Russian general staff facing this dilemma. Should we protect the capital, or our soldiers on the front lines? Every Pantsir battery withdrawn to protect Moscow left a command center or ammunition depot in Donbass more vulnerable to Ukrainian missiles. With this move, Ukraine was forcing Russia to make a painful choice among its most valuable assets. Moscow had to protect major cities like St. Petersburg, leadership centers like Putin's residence in Sochi, and critical infrastructure that was the regime's nervous system. This is a political necessity to maintain the regime's strong and protective image among the people, prevent panic among the elite, and ensure internal stability. protecting command centers, ammunition depots, air bases, and frontline troops in Ukraine. This is a military necessity to avoid losing the war, prevent the collapse of the front lines, and maintain the army's combat capability. The problem is that Ukraine's ability to strike both the front lines and Russia's depths simultaneously and at a high tempo has created a threat that exceeds the number of modern and effective short-range air defense systems at Russia's disposal. Russia can no longer protect both places simultaneously and with 100% effectiveness. At this point, three bad options appear on the Kremlin's table. The first option is defend the castle, sacrifice the front. In this scenario, Putin thinks like a politician, not a general. His priority is to protect Moscow, the center of his regime, and the areas where the elite live. He withdraws the most modern and capable Pantsir S-1 batteries from the Ukrainian front, along with their experienced crews, and redeploys them to create a multi-layered, denser defense dome around Moscow. He places more systems on the roofs of buildings in Moscow and increases protection around critical infrastructure. This move provides a political advantage but loses the front. The second option is win the war, risk the castle. In this scenario, the Kremlin follows the general's advice and prioritizes not losing the war. It continues to keep the best air defense systems on the Ukrainian front, where they are most needed. It tries to manage the defense of Moscow and other cities with older systems or a sparser deployment. It accepts the risk that some of the UAV attacks on the capital will be successful. The final option is try to do both, fail at both. This is the path typically chosen by authoritarian regimes facing a dilemma and unable to make a clear decision. And this is the strategy Russia is currently pursuing. Ukraine's strategy has forced Russia into a no-win game. Putin's options are not between victory and defeat. The options are between a rapid military collapse and a slow and painful political collapse. This painful dilemma is as valuable to Ukraine as a victory won on the battlefield, because it forces its enemy to destroy itself from within, through its own decisions. Thank you for